Hello everyone, welcome. We are talking about the development of brain and this is the first section. I am Dr. Sananu Rahman. In this section we talk about the brain flexures. Before getting into this section, we'll have a small overview in which we'll talk about the segments which help in the formation of brain. That is, what are the embryological precursors that help in development of the adult brain. Then we'll move on to the flexures themselves and we'll see what they do and how do they align themselves to form the adult structures. So moving on, the brain develops from the enlarged cranial part of the neural tube. So the neural tube that forms the brain actually divides into two parts, an upper enlarged cranial part and a lower, smaller, narrowed caudal part. The upper enlarged cranial part forms the brain while the lower small narrowed part forms the spinal cord. So we can see this upper enlarged cranial part in the figure as well. This is the precursor of the brain. So it is the end of fourth week of development in the embryo. The enlarged cranial or the cephalic part now shows three distinct dilations. Now you can see these dilations in the figure. This in yellow is the first dilation, in green the second, and in pink the third. This in yellow is the dilation of the forebrain. So this is prosencephalon or the primary forebrain dilation or vesicle. In green we have the mesencephalon or the primary midbrain vesicle. And in pink we have the rhombencephalon or the primary hindbrain vesicle. So these are the three vesicles that are formed by dilation of the enlarged cranial part of the neural tube. So now these brain vesicles, they undergo further branching and form the secondary brain vesicles. Now let's see how that happens. So this is the prosencephalon, the forebrain. Now the mesencephalon, the precursor of the midbrain, and the rhombencephalon, the hindbrain. So now the secondary brain vesicles are formed. This prosencephalon, which was the primary brain vesicle, it divides into two. Here you can see it divides into two lateral outpouchings. These are known as the telencephalon, and a small central part that connects this telencephalon to mesencephalon. This is known as the diencephalon. So these two, the telencephalon and diencephalon, are the secondary forebrain vesicles which are derived from the primary forebrain vesicle, that is the prosencephalon. Now in the region of midbrain, that is the mesencephalon, there is no branching. The midbrain remains as such. The rhombencephalon also divides into two parts, the cranial expanded portion, the metencephalon, and the caudal narrowed portion, the myelencephalon. So let's see how these develop. So the telencephalon, it develops by lateral diverticula, which evaginate into the surrounding area and enlarge and overgrow. They enlarge and overgrow and cover the diencephalon to form the cerebral hemispheres. So the cerebral hemispheres are actually formed by the lateral outpouchings of the prosencephalon, now known as the telencephalon. Moving on, the diencephalon, it actually becomes hidden beneath the cerebral hemispheres, that is the lower part of the telencephalon, and forms the thalamus, the hypothalamus, the epithalamus, and the surrounding area. So this diencephalon actually serves as a connection between the telencephalon and the mesencephalon. So moving on, the mesencephalon, it gives rise to the midbrain, and the cavity of the mesencephalon, this area, this cavity, it narrows progressively to form this cerebral aqueduct. Now moving on to the hindbrain, the metencephalon and the myelencephalon. So the cranial part, the metencephalon, it develops into the pons, and the cerebellum. And the caudal part, the myelencephalon, it forms the medulla oblongata. So these are the differentiations of the embryonic structures of the brain. We saw how the primary brain vesicles were converted to secondary brain vesicles and what structures these secondary brain vesicles gave rise to. So moving on, this is a summarized view of what developmental structures give rise to what adult structures. We have three primary brain vesicles. First of all, let's take a look at the prosencephalon, or the vesicle of primary brain vesicle of the forebrain. So this prosencephalon gives rise to telencephalon, which is cranial, and diencephalon, which is caudal. Now, the telencephalon forms the cerebral hemispheres, and the diencephalon forms the thalamus, the metathalamus, the hypothalamus, the subthalamus, and the epithalamus. So it's a connecting bridge between the telencephalon and the mesencephalon. And what parts of the vestibular system are formed by the forebrain? These are the lateral and the third ventricles. Mind you, there are two lateral ventricles and a single third ventricle. Now we have mesencephalon, which was the primary brain vesicle of the midbrain. It remains as such. It does not form any secondary vesicles. It formed the midbrain, which is the primitive most, developmentally, the primitive most part of the brain, the cavity of which narrows to form the cerebral aqueduct. Now we have the rhombencephalon, which is the primary brain vesicle of the hindbrain. It gives rise to a metencephalon. This metencephalon lies cranially, and myelencephalon, which lies caudally. The metencephalon gives rise to pons, cerebellum, and medulla oblongata. Metencephalon gives rise to pons and cerebellum, and myelencephalon forms the medulla oblongata. And the part of the vestibular system which is formed by this rhombencephalon is the fourth ventricle. This is an important slide, important table, as in it summarizes the development of brain. It can be very helpful if you memorize it. So moving on, we have the flexures of the brain. So there are three flexures in the brain that help the brain to attain its adult position in the human body. These three flexures are the Pontine flexure, here in purple. This Pontine flexure lies in the middle of the rhombencephalon. Then we have the cervical flexure. This is the cervical flexure at the junction of the rhombencephalon, the caudalmost part of the developing brain, and the cranialmost part of the spinal cord. And finally, we have the cephalic flexure here. This is the cephalic flexure, which is located in the region of the midbrain. So the cephalic and the cervical flexure, here you can see this is the cephalic flexure and this is the cervical flexure. They are concave ventrally. So they are concave on the ventral side. Here you can see this is the concavity. Here you can see the concavity of these flexure, and they're concave on the ventral side. That is, the concavity lies towards the ventral side of the body. Whereas the Pontine flexure, here you can see this is the Pontine flexure. It exhibits a ventral convexity. Here you can see it is convex as compared to the ventral wall of the body. So now we are comparing these flexures to the ventral wall of the body. Now the cephalic flexure and the cervical flexure, both of them lie concave as compared to the ventral wall of the body. However, the Pontine flexure lies in convexity with the ventral wall of the body. We'll see the importance of this concavity and convexity in a little detail in a little while. So now this cervical flexure, it makes a 90-degree bend. So it bends at a 90 degree, that is at a right angle between the hindbrain and the spinal cord. So there is a 90-degree bend between the midbrain and the spinal cord. This causes the brain to be oriented almost at a 90-degree to the spinal cord. So brain is now oriented at a 90-degree to the spinal cord. So to understand it, visualize the cervical. Where does the cervical flexure lie? The cervical flexure lies between the brain and the spinal cord. So now the flexure, it undergoes a 90-degree rotation. That is, it rotates at a 90-degree. Hence, the brain makes a 90-degree angle with the spine, almost a 90-degree angle with the spinal cord. Now, we're talking about the Pontine flexure, slightly complicated but very easy once you get it. So the hindbrain folds at the middle, they're forming an acute angle ventrally. So here in the figure you can see that this in purple is the Pontine flexure. So the hindbrain, it folds at the middle, forming an acute angle ventrally. So these are the ventral acute angles. This changes the shape of the tube. Now you can see this was the initial shape of the tube, the dotted lines, and now the shape of the tube has been changed. So the shape of the tube has been changed. And why has it changed? Because the hindbrain folds at the middle and it forms an acute angle on the ventral walls. Now the cavity becomes a diamond shape. Here you can see this is a diamond shaped cavity with diamond shape, and this is the precursor of the fourth ventricle. Now it is widest at the line of the folding. Here you can see this is the widest part. This is the line of the folding. Now it tapers superiorly. Here you can see there's superior tapering. So it tapers superiorly to a narrow canal of the midbrain. Here, this is the narrow canal. This area is where the narrow canal of the midbrain lies, which is the aqueduct of Sylvius. Aqueduct of the Sylvius or cerebral aqueduct is the canal of the midline which lies of the midbrain, which lies superiorly. And inferiorly here to the central canal in the lower part of the medulla oblongata. So superiorly it connects with the canal of the midbrain. Obviously hindbrain is connected to midbrain superiorly. So the superior part of the hindbrain, it connects to the cerebral aqueduct or aqueduct of Sylvius on its upper end. And on its lower end it is connected to medulla oblongata. So the central canal of the medulla oblongata is connected on its lower end. So the thin roof is pulled out to cover the space posteriorly. This tube is being also pulled posteriorly from the roof. So it's a three-dimensional orientation, a little difficult to imagine, but if you keep up with me, you'll be able to understand it. Now, the line of folding extends far laterally as roof of lateral recess of the fourth ventricle. This posterior expansion of the roof finally forms the roof of the recess of the fourth ventricle. What you need to understand at this point in time is that the roof is being pulled out posteriorly, and this pulling out of the roof helps in the formation of roof of the lateral recess of the fourth ventricle. Now the thin roof, it breaks down, it forms apertures. These apertures are the foramina through which the cerebrospinal fluid flows. Now, the cavity of the neural tube communicates with the surrounding subarachnoid space through these foramina that are formed in the roof. So, recapping this entirety, here you can see this is the mesencephalon, the midbrain in itself. This is the Pontine flexure we are talking about. So, the Pontine flexure, first of all, it changes its shape to diamond shape. The upper part is continuous with the midbrain, the cerebral aqueduct. The lower part is continuous with the hindbrain, the central canal of the medulla oblongata. The roof forms the lateral wall of the lateral recesses of the fourth ventricle. The central part forms the fourth ventricle. The roof is then perforated to form foramina through which cerebrospinal fluid communicates with the surrounding subarachnoid space. So this is all about the Pontine flexure. Moving on, the Pontine flexure, the flattening causes the flattening of hindbrain from folding. Now, this flattening displaces the alar laminae to lie lateral to the basal laminae. So what happens is flattening of hindbrain. Because there is folding of hindbrain, since the hindbrain has folded like this, there is flattening of the hindbrain. So due to flattening of the hindbrain, the alar laminae, they lie lateral to the basal laminae. Due to this, the sensory nuclei which form from the alar laminae are also lateral to the motor nuclei that are formed from the basal laminae. So this is how the orientation of the sensory and the motor nuclei takes place. There's squishing of the hindbrain. The squishing and smacking of the hindbrain causes the alar laminae to lie lateral to the basal laminae. Hence, the sensory nuclei lie lateral to the motor nuclei. Now, the sensory cranial nerves, which are attached to laterally, which are a part of this, which arise from the sensory nuclei, they are lateral as compared to the motor nuclei, which arise from the basal laminae. So the arrangement of alar as well as the basal laminae is also determined by the folding of the Pontine flexure. So a simple concept, you just have to grab it. So moving on, we have the cervical flexure. So we're talking about the cervical flexure now. It is convex dorsally. So now we're talking about the dorsal wall. So from this side it appears convex and appears as at a junction of the hindbrain and the spinal cord. It makes a right angle between them. Now the cephalic flexure, it is convex dorsally and it appears at the level of the midbrain. This is the cephalic flexure and it appears at the level of midbrain. So this was all about this section. In this section we talked about the development of brain, the primary brain vesicles, the secondary vesicles and the flexures of the brain. I hope you liked and understood it. For further sections, keep watching sqadia.com.